Us. Oh, hold on. I'm going to go live on YouTube really quick. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're really excited to be hosting Jeanette Mundt as part of our programming at Hunter College MFA Studio Art Program. And this is our now second online lecture ever, where we're kind of excited to go forward with the online lecture, actually. So maybe we're going to do some things over the summer. Maybe the fall will be a hybrid thing. In any case, for those of you who aren't Hunter students under normal circumstances, we offer 9 free public lectures per semester on campus, as well as twice yearly open studios, which has a really amazing affordable art auction. It's usually like 50 to 70 pieces of art to buy or bid on. You can always see upcoming events on the department website, which I'm going to post in the chat in a second. Or for those of you on YouTube, it's in the video description. Also, it's going to be posted is a link to a GoFundMe independently organized by current MFA candidates to support the many working artists in the program who have lost all or most of their income due to COVID-19 and now being in lockdown for almost 60 days. So we'd be deeply grateful for donations of any size, or if you could share the fundraiser to help us reach more people, which is honestly probably the most useful thing. We will have a Q&A at the end, facilitated by my fellow MFA candidate, Christina Smith. So please write your questions in the chat during the lecture, but also you're welcome to put your name in as a stack and ask your question through voice chat, through video, however you want to. Lastly, a thank you to Hunter MFA alum Ricardo Contreras for setting up and hosting the YouTube stream so we can reach more people. And that is the end of my school announcements. So thank you all for being here. I'm happy to introduce Jeanette Mundt. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I just want to quickly give an intro to what I'm doing, what I'm going to be doing really fast. So I'm going to share a video that I made, and the impetus for this is kind of the current situation that we're all in. So just to address it, my husband and I moved up to upstate to we have a little barn here. It's like one room. It's literally just one room. And we came up here mid-March, sort of completely, into a rural experience out of, it was the beginning of the pandemic, the beginning of the shutdown. Everything was very confusing. And so our heads were really like completely in new zone, unfocused, not determined, a little bit afraid. And so we spent some time sort of not really thinking all that much, just kind of functioning. And then we slowly started thinking again. And part of what we, when we came back to is kind of like, why, like how do we get back to making work, and more specifically I kind of like moved through this, it was kind of like, how would we, but also kind of why would I keep making work? Everything has changed so dramatically, and my head, what I spent all of my time doing, thinking about art, and I, we spend a lot of time, I spent a lot of time thinking about work, thinking about art, thinking about painting, et cetera, et cetera. And then in this new world, it was completely removed from this way of thinking that was familiar. And so I kind of really was like, why would I even be making work? Where does that come from? What pushes me forward? Why would I do this? Maybe I just don't for a while. But really quickly, the drive came back. It was really clear that I wasn't going to stop, actually. But the reason why I was doing it, had sort of changed. Experientially, it had changed drastically. So I no longer was kind of, thinking critically or analytically or theoretically, historically, et cetera. I wasn't really thinking. And it sort of evolved, like as my husband and I started drawing and painting and working in this tiny space, both of us together kind of on top of each other. What sort of became clear was that the art making had taken on sort of a social dynamic, right? So my husband was drawing a lot during, FaceTimes with family and friends. and I was, painting while, watching TV documentaries or, Netflix or whatever, and chatting and stuff. So it was the drive was there, the work is being made, I'm still going, but really fundamentally the reasons have shifted and they're gone, and it's taken on this social aspect. So what I wanted to do tonight was kind of share that, because I don't think it's very unique. I think a lot of people are experiencing this. So what I wanted to do was sort of share that and talk as I paint, kind of go through the motions of this. So what I did, because I work in layers, is I recorded myself painting this. And so I'm going to play that recording and then continue painting this and talk. So hopefully, you'll get this full screen of me painting the recording, and then in the corner, hopefully you'll get the little screen of me continuing the same painting. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if I can do that. Share screen. Desktop one. Okay. So I think if I put this, okay, so let's do this, and I am going to expand it a little bit. Oh, of course it's moving. Okay, I'm just gonna play it, and I'm gonna paint, and I'm gonna talk. So if anything, gets bumpy, let me know. If the audio or anything, somebody shout, stop me, because I could just get real into it and go. Okay, so what I wanted to do, in lieu of this being sort of not the normal thought space for my work, and maybe not, art in general, whatever it is I wanted to get really personal. So I just kind of wanted to give my background and talk about like what's at the core, what drives all of my movings in like art making, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to do that. And then we'll go from there. Oh, I forgot to start my time, but that's fine. Somebody shout at me. Okay, so we'll count down. Okay, we'll just go. Okay, so I was born in New Jersey, and I grew up in Switzerland. When I was 10, I moved to Switzerland, and I had no real understanding of what it meant to be American at all. When I was 10, I just kind of moved to Switzerland, and I ended up going to an international school. And an international school is one where it was very, very small, and it's really catering to families whose parents, whose jobs, require that they move countries every 2 to 4 years. So it's a very small community, and it changes very often, very fast. So my father did not have us. We were in Switzerland for his job, and he did not need us to move. So I was there for 10 years until I was from 10 to 8 years, until I was 18. And so this community that I lived in, there was, students, every student stood for the country that they came from. No matter how often they had moved, they stood for where they had just come from. And this was really important in sort of forming who I was, because I was American. I was the American, there was a handful of us, but it was like I was the American, and my brothers as well, and we understood ourselves to be American. And this was kind of a really fundamental part of how I understood myself in the world, along with being female, because being female is something that, I have 2 brothers, so from a very early age, I understood that I lived in a very different world than my brothers, and I also understood that they didn't really understand that we saw the world very differently. And that I was far more aware of this experience than them. So I was very female, and then in Switzerland, I was very American. And this is how we interacted as kids, and it's how I understood myself. But also in Switzerland in the 90s, you were really, you know, Americans were looked down on, very, very much so. And this was my experience. I guess I'm going to generalize a lot, but this was speaking from my experience. So the Swiss really did not, a lot of countries, but I'm just going to speak about the Swiss because that was my immediate experience, but they didn't like us. And they didn't like, the stereotype was that we were fat and lazy and dumb. And so I lived in this kind of world where in my school, I operated as American and stood for American and wanted to be American. And then on the outside, I wanted to not give away that I wasn't Swiss. And obviously, physically, being white, I could pass as Swiss. But the second I opened my mouth, it was, really I got a lot of like, why are you here? Why don't you speak German? Why don't you assimilate properly? Why are you acting so American? Go home. Got this a lot. These are language that's very familiar in our culture these days, unfortunately. But it's also just kind of like fear of the other, racism, foreign, being afraid of the foreign, like 101, right? So I got this a lot. So I had this sort of outside experience where I wanted to be American in my school and stand for my country. And then I also wanted to not be American at all. And I ended up thinking a lot about what it meant to be American, what it meant to fill this role in this country, and in one place be proud and in one place be afraid and nervous and try to keep it to myself, right? And so this awareness really, formulated, founded, constructed who I was, when I was young. So then I moved to America when I was 18 to go to Emerson for writing. I really wanted the American college experience. This is what I wanted. I really thought I was American. I wanted the American college experience. So I went to Boston to Emerson. And I really, 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 really quickly realized I wasn't American at all. In every way that I had believed myself to be American, I was not. And Americans recognized me. Everybody recognized me right away as not American. And so this was an absolutely shattering experience where I lost all sense of who I was and how I fit in and what I expected of myself. I mean, down to like even the language. So I understood myself to be American. I had learned German. I had learned Swiss German. I had learned French, etc. And then I moved to my home country where I was going to speak my mother tongue. And then I didn't understand it. Like I understand the words, but like I would go to, parties, and all of the I'd be talking to a bunch of people, and they would all be talking, and then I would understand it and keep up, and then all of a sudden it would break, and someone would say something, and I could understand the words that were being communicated, but I didn't understand where they were coming from, where they were going. And so I couldn't keep up in the conversation, and everybody else could. There would be this as a whole, everybody around would follow. They'd all speak in words that I understood, but I couldn't follow it. So I would just drop out. And this happened over and over and over again. Finally, of course, I learned that there were things like, Simpsons quotes, or quotes from Friends, or, lyrics from like Cherry Blossom Clinic or something from the 90s. I don't even know. But like, I knew the things. I had seen The Simpsons. I had seen the movies, I knew it, but I didn't know them inside and out. I didn't have a feel for the reference, have a feel for the rhythm. I couldn't keep up. So it was even to the point where like, I felt like I even no longer understood or spoke my mother tongue. So this put me on the outside, really observing people, Americans, nationalities, on top of already being concerned about like how you formulate yourself as a female and how you perform femininity and how you perform being female. So I really ended up in this place where I was examining everything that constructs these significant parts of who we understand ourselves to be. So this is really at the core, at so much of the core of my thinking and my working in art. So Like it's really these constructs of people and personality, you know. So I'm gonna paint my tattoos now, so it's gonna get intense. I know them well, but I don't know them that well, and that's weird. But so, you know, when I first started painting, I was painting a lot of like interiors from like 70s magazines, like how people experience themselves and put themselves forward in public according to their interior design and their taste. You know, this was really interesting. And then sort of I played with, you know, later I played with like having grown up in Switzerland. So I played with like mountains and, you know, landscape, and sort of played with the stereotypes of being Swiss, because, you know, I really was thinking about how you, if you say like, oh, I grew up in Switzerland, like what do Americans think that means? That was part of me trying to figure out like, how am I American? What do Americans think I am and where I came from? And so part of it was this. And like all these weird details in the tattoos. So I, you know, I really played with these mountains for a while, playing with the fact that I came from Switzerland and the fact that Americans understood Switzerland to be mountains. And there, that gave me also this room to play with the language around that, because I'm female, obviously, again, and I do a lot of thinking about that. And a lot of language constructs like female, and a lot of like mountains, like I specifically was painting this mountain called Jungfrau. The Jungfrau, you know, in German, young woman, virgin, Virgo. It has all of these like very female-centric ideas, references rather. And so I was painting the Jungfrau for a while, and this, of course, allowed me to go into like the painting, you know, engaging with the history of painting, right? So landscapes and painting landscapes from images sort of gave it this kind of like from the internet, and I'd get the images from the internet, and this gave it kind of a much more sort of contemporary conceptual construction, because it's like, you know, I was just painting from the internet. So this was sort of early on. But then also I painted, you know, I went on to paint, or continue to paint a lot of females, right? I'm really interested in these archetypes, how we understand through these archetypes how you construct yourself as a person, right? This is all like, none of this is particularly new, but it's like very exciting to me. So I did a lot of painting of like femme fatales, like Patricia Arquette in Lost Highway, and Eve, and who else? Lots of, you know, even the like Elizabeth Taylor in Suddenly Last Summer, you know, pulling these women who we know so well to stand for women, you know. And then even, you know, obviously myself, I began playing with this idea that I am the archetypal woman, that I can play this role, that I can take on the stereotypes much more aggressively to sort of put forward who I am as female. I want this kind of, I don't normally work on an easel. Also, I'm used to working on the wall. So this whole thing is very lopsided, but the focus, like I said earlier, is just to kind of work through it. It's not to feel like I'm doing what I used to do, or what I anticipated being always able to do. But so archetypes, yeah. So painting myself as these archetypes. Like I painted myself in the show that I have up at Company that will remain up indefinitely. It's me. I painted myself as a Mary, Mother of God, right? Playing with all of these layers, playing with these archetypes to try to figure out how these systems work and how we can feed back into them. There's you know, the way that we play with language, the way that we play with how we define ourselves and the people around us. These things are enormously important. Of course, you all know this, you're all in school, and there's a huge focus on this at school, right? And there's a huge focus on this sort of more, there's a huge shift that happened, even in my short time in the playing in this art room, where there was a lot of focus. There is increasingly more focus on the language, the word-based texts around art. And this is a method of control, right? Language. It's control. It's how you control. It's how you build and construct. And so there's sort of a movement away from thinking in images, like really thinking in images and not clouding any of this other words. But in order to reach the populace, you have to kind of, there's this idea that you have to kind of make it accessible by simplifying it into words that are really understandable. So you do so in the press releases, in the interviews, in the you know, New Yorker review blurbs, you know, et cetera, so that you get the most people involved that you can. But this sort of takes away from this sort of, you know, I'm not saying that language isn't complex, but there's this other complex field that, you know, artists operate in that's just image-based. And this is something that I really value, and that sort of has moved away from us. We don't have as much access to it as we used to. It's not sort of, I mean, even in grad school, I'm sure you've all experienced it. We were watching, okay, I'm going all over the place, but I'm talking about how you construct how we construct ourselves as artists, as people, as Americans, as whatever you identify as. And what I want to sort of bring it into is how language really helps that, and how it's really enforced and put on us in a way to control us. And there are ways to kind of push back on this by understanding where it's coming from and sort of where it's going. And I think it's really fascinating also. And then that also allows you more room to think sort of imagistically, oh my God, I made both legs one leg because I'm talking. It doesn't matter. I'm just gonna fix it because I'm painting. Okay, so, here we go. Oh my God, it's beautiful anyway. So, I was watching, my husband and I were watching the Philip Guston documentary. And in this documentary, Philip Guston starts talking about how he was making a painting, and there were, you know, the squares were up in the right-hand side of the painting, and he was looking at it and working on it, and he gave it a little space, and he came back and decided that, you know, it really felt like the squares actually belonged on the other side. That's how he describes it. It felt like these things belonged at this other space. And I commented to my husband, you know, when I was in Rutgers, there's no way anyone would have accepted that language. You know, if I had described like, oh, I was making the tattoo into two legs, and then it really felt like it just needed to be the one leg. That was not acceptable at my time in Rutgers, which was very recent. So I'm sure many of you have experienced something similar. There is this idea that, like, you know, it really reflects the time that we're in. Like, obviously Guston was reflecting the time that he was in. He was, you know, supposed to speak that way, and he did so. Although Guston did a lot that he wasn't supposed to do, but still, he knew he had that room to speak that way, and that it furthered who he was and what he was doing, right? And we kind of aren't allowed to. I think that's up in the air now, like a lot of things, actually, which is why I'm kind of taking this much more leisurely approach to this, because I think that we're going to be given a lot of space to reassess how we speak about our work in the world. And there's a couple of things about this that I think I've noticed since we've gone into quarantine. And part of that is the way that we're experiencing art now is, you know, all entirely online. And maybe you were already there, although I doubt it because you're living in New York, so you were experiencing some of it physically. But certainly it's really, really online and really fast now. We have viewing rooms that you get invited to, and these viewing rooms have titles, dimensions, thumbnail, prices, whether or not they're sold. You get all of this information, right? And the image is quite small, and you're not experiencing it. So like everything right now, as it seems in the pandemic, like the world that was in existence before will continue in all of its fucked upness, but it will be ramped up, right? So this focus on language that was like words and language that was taking over the image-based thinking that was happening prior is really going to excel right now. And so I kind of have been thinking a lot about really how important it is to understand how language is used and understand how you use it and how it reflects your work and what you want to get out of your work and what you want people to get out of your work. You know, like Philip Guston really understood that he was, you know, the male painter in control of saying how these squares commanded his actions on the canvas. And I don't think that that's not a valid experience. I really think that that is something that as an artist, you actually do work intuitively very often, and you have these compulsions, and they are as true as anything else. And I think sort of moving into a place where one is comfortable with using that language and not sort of just relying on the way that the outside is controlling you and your work and your language is going to be very important moving forward. So I kind of wanted to put that forward. I don't want to preach about that, but I did want to kind of put that forward and just say, like, you know, it is something that I've thought about a lot, because I really I'm focusing because I really do think that it's that the contrast between these two modes of thought is really interesting, and it has everything to do with art and how we think about art and how we think about. I mean, you know, how we learn to be artists, to perform artists. It's not from watching someone mess up their painting publicly, but it is from, it's, you know, it's not, it's from the press releases, it's from the interviews, it's from the history, it's from everything that's written, and that's how you learn how to perform artists. If you're just looking at the painting, you don't get an idea of how to perform the artist. And so moving forward, I think this language is very important. I just wanted to put that, you know, out there, because things really are confusing right now, and it's hard to kind of latch on to where we're going. And I do think that I'm concerned with how I put forward my work in this time when everything will become consumable on a level that we were familiar with, but that will be, I think, kind of scary, and ultimately maybe epistemologically, or rather existentially, maybe damaging, if you think about, like, just, anyway. So language and how it functions in your practices, I think, is very important. It's very important to me. And I haven't done that much on this painting, but I do want to do my elbow really fast. I expected to paint a lot more, but talking and painting is actually not easy, though Bob Ross made it look very easy. But I'm just going to do this really quickly and sort of be quiet for a second, because I just want to get this spider web in there. Everything will be sort of pushed back on by the landscape. So I'm just going to fold it in. But I hope that this, I know that it was very severely personal, but I kind of thought that talking about really where my you know, the core, the push of this, the drive really comes from, I thought that would be helpful, because we're so far away from what we understood to be thinking about our work and the world around us and the art around us and how it functions. Yeah. Okay, great. So the video, I think, goes on for a little while, but maybe if you want to, I'm gonna stop it and we can ask some questions, and I'm gonna maybe put some grass in the background while we ask questions. Does that sound okay? Let me stop this share. Then maybe you get a better view of what I'm messing up anyway.
That's great.
How's that?
Yeah, that sounds great, but you can also go on because so far, I mean, does anyone have a question right now?
We can also give people a minute to formulate their thoughts. Questions will come.
Okay.
And we can always start us off.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually came into this thinking about asking you to talk a little bit about the sort of increasing expectation for professionalization as artists. And then you did talk about that, but I don't know, I feel like there's always more.
I do think that it's something that is, you know, it's something that's really real, and it's something that's sort of unavoidable. And it certainly will be something, again, that I think will become far more pronounced in the future, depending on where we go, but it looks like it will be. And it's just it operates in this way where, like, the balance is kind of like, if you want, I mean, there are many ways to play it, but there is a way to operate in the world, quote unquote, professionally, and maintain close ties to yourself and what you want out of your experiences. I think that it's kind of hard to, it's disappointing maybe how professional everything has gotten, but at the same time as it was getting so professional, the world, there were different, like, art world is whatever term that is, but there were many different worlds happening at once, and they were expanding. And so there was kind of this understanding that, like, you don't have to participate in a way that makes you feel, I mean, this is how it was. I really don't think it will continue this way. I think the different simultaneous art worlds out there, I don't think they'll go away, but I think they'll change very drastically. But you can operate at what sort of level you're comfortable with. That sounds lame, but it's really true, I think. You can act in ways that make you feel comfortable and still find, like, a community that is quote unquote professional, or a community that is absolutely not, but you can still somehow function in it to, like, paint and support yourself comfortably. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think the more people say things like this, the more of a relief it is.
Well, that's good. Okay, good. Good. I think that it is a weird pressure that you experience, especially at art school. My experience at Rutgers was a group of people that really didn't want to be professional, but were at school trying to be professional. And the schizophrenia in that, I think, ultimately is very damaging. I think you can figure it out and not put so much pressure on yourself to operate in these worlds that are highly visible, and also that you're not really sure you want to participate in anyway. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Lauren, do you want to jump in with your question?
Yeah. I guess can you hear me? Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So do you feel like, first of all, that was a huge relief hearing that. It really sucks trying to pretend to be professional when all the time you feel like not that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, do you feel like this is like you're painting right now the way that you're doing this more social version of painting over Zoom? Does this feel more performative for you, or is it still like feeling very personal?
So there's a bunch of layers there. One is, yes, ultimately this is a performance. Uh, I don't, I understand that there's a group of you out there, but I also can't see you really. So yeah, I know this to be a performance, but I don't, the audience idea is very strange and new. But then also, not to be too annoyingly like, I don't know, philosophical, but like, I really often feel like I'm performing most of the time in my studio by myself. I work really, there are definite, I know you're all artists, so you experience this. There are moments when you go outside of yourself, and in those moments, I'm not performing. But when I'm in my studio and I haven't achieved that zone, I'm performing. And I don't think that's avoidable. Again, I'm female. I've been taught how to perform since in the womb still. And as an artist, I only know how artists work by consuming what was performed before me, right? So again, it's those moments when you leave yourself that really I fight for all the time. But most of the time, even if I'm by myself, I'm performing, unfortunately. And maybe it's not unfortunate. I actually don't think that's unfortunate. I think that's my life, and I work through it. But I don't know how like, especially as a female painter, like everything I do, I'm like, I'm a female painter, because it's shoved down your throat, through this wildly established history. So this is very performative. Most of the time it's performative. When really exciting things happen, you go into that zone where you're just lost. Does that make sense? It sounds so cliche, but you get what I mean, right?
Lauren, did that answer your question?
No. No.
Oh, wait, I tried to unmute you.
Actually, everyone should be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay, it's working now. Yeah, that does answer that, and that is also it's yes, I feel the same way. And I guess like if you are performing all the time, or not all the time, but like when you enter studio, which is like a very relatable thing, like how do you, I guess, like what is your ritual for getting in there to go from like your personhood self into like studio and being like, okay, I'm gonna be a painter now and do my painter thing?
It's weird, I feel like the annoying thing about that is my answer comes from Charlene von Heil. So it's a performance. Like I'm perpetuating this. I read maybe it was an interview. Is it an interview? And it's in a talk. Maybe she said she gets into the studio and it's really important for her to change into her painting outfit to move into painting. And that I don't know what I did before, but since I've heard that, that's how I live. So yeah, it's really, I'm a child. I'm just mimicking the people who've come before me. But yeah, so yeah, that's how it's really like change out of my clothes. And that's what I do here. I mean, this is a perfect example. This is the same room that I work for an artist. So this is the same room that I work for him in, that I eat in. It's right next to where I cook, and I paint and draw after I change my clothes. So weird. Yeah, Charlene.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Janine had a question as well. And when you ask your questions, you can also switch on your camera if you want to, so we can see you.
Hi.
Hi.
I I was curious about, you were talking about this language issue.
Yeah.
And sort of like the complications around that, and how it kind of like seizes up and makes it, it's like just a difficult transition from one thing to the other in this like outward presentation and this inner dialogue or whatever.
Yeah.
And I totally, my Wi-Fi cut out when you were talking about having watched this like Philip Guston documentary, and you said something about how he was like saying this thing and you were like, I could never say that about my work. And I was curious if you said this already, forgive me because I just missed it, but did you say like how you came to terms with it, like how you resolved it, and how you ended up, oh sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, just like how you ended up framing what you do, like in that arena.
It was really just the other day. And so, you know, when I was at Rutgers, and I think that this is I think this is really something that happened in the early 2000s, maybe, like before zombie form, or did it come out after zombie formalism? There was a real big emphasis on using theory and philosophy that, like, I can't even imagine most philosophers understand. And yet there was a whole group of New York artists delving into these like tomes and putting them forward, and it became this kind of standard, right? So that was really a reflection of that time. And as we moved, through, I'm going to totally simplify this, but like through zombie formalism and then into like where we are, or rather where we just were, where it was like identity politics, the language it remained so much more important in the studio visits, and when sort of going through what you're doing in your practice, it remains so much more important than the work. You could, there was this real shift where I began to notice, like, and this has always been the case. I don't think that this is new, but watching this shift in how we as students, or as sort of maybe less professional artists operate, the artists who seem to be like soaring, the way that they were able to speak about their work was, it had nothing to do with art. And it was fantastic, right? It was gorgeous. It was super, the way they use language is great. I loved it. It sold me, but it didn't have much to do with art. And so it was kind of this weird imbalance, and I think it really has always been that way. Like I said, Philip Guston was using the language that he understood to promote himself and his work. He identified who he was really clearly, and he knew how to speak about his work. That is the same now. But I do really think that, like, you can, like at Rutgers, I was never allowed to speak that way. And now I really feel like I can absolutely do that, because right now there's no limits, because we're in this uncharted territory. And I think, I'm daydreaming here, obviously. I'm not a person who has a lot of power in the world, but I do think, in my daydream, that I can refigure how I speak about my work without taking into account, anything that I learned at grad school, and make it my own now. And when we emerge from this, as we slowly move forward, I can employ this new language, because I'm an intuitive painter. I identify with Philip Guston saying, like, this red square belongs over here. Like, yeah, that's how I paint. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I mean, you just watch me make a mess. Like, I work really intuitively, so that language is far, far more familiar to me, and so much more a part of what I'm doing than what was expected of me at grad school. And so right now, again, I might just be really optimistic, but I think that we can, in these weird little pockets that we're existing in, sort of go to the language that we feel most comfortable in, while still acknowledging what control is on us, by language, how systematically we're controlled by it, but sort of start putting where we feel more comfortable back into the world that we operate in. Does that make sense? Did I just ramble?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. I think, you know, again, it's idealistic, but we're left with like that or like extreme pessimism at this point. So, and we probably all oscillate. I think you can use you can start to employ a language that's more natural. At least that's how I envision it.
We have 2 more questions in the chat, so I guess, Mercedes, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah.
No?
Oh, there's my alarm. I did it.
Oh. You can unmute yourself. Just click on the microphone, should work. Can you?
So my question was, I'm also painting like you.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, I had a similar life experience. I moved a lot when I was a child to different countries and cities. And I was wondering, like, how do you feel today as to where are you from? Like, are you American or do you belong anywhere? And I don't know, how do you feel about that? And then another question I'll ask you later.
Okay. I don't think of myself as American. No. I think fundamentally I had shifted too much and it had changed, you know, I just still see myself as operating outside of this because I don't have the foundation. You know, I really, this idea of home, you know, Paul Chan talked about it in his talk, this idea of home. I mean, like the word comes from haunt. The word haunt comes from home, right? So there's this kind of, home has never felt concrete to me. It's something that I think to a lot of Americans feels really concrete. To a lot of people, you know, who I was in school, high school with, like where they were from was concrete. That was home. I've never had that. I didn't experience it when I was young. I didn't experience it in Switzerland. I don't experience it now. The thing that has shifted, because I think I'm just old, and I think, well, I'm not that old, you know, I'm young, but I'm older. And what I've noticed that happens to a lot of people is as they get older, they kind of want to go back to where they were formed as people. And so I'm not calling it home because I don't think of myself as ever going home. But I do think that I do want to go back to Switzerland because so much of my formation was there. And so as I've sort of gotten older, I feel this yearning is a very deliberate word, but like this ridiculous, because it's a little bit ridiculous, but this yearning to go back to Switzerland, but it's not a home and I don't feel American. Yeah. And that's okay. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, cool. Then the other thing was, because you talked to me about kind of masking your emotions in your work, right? Yeah. Or like feeling upset about being too much, you know, emotionally.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about in the video, made me wonder if you are thinking of changing that direction or, you know, being more transparent in any way.
No, definitely not. I mean, this is my transparency, right? Because I feel very on the surface right now, but even the layering of like the video and then playing, you know, I am painting myself and I like all the layers. I like the webs. I like you know, I'm more comfortable at a distance and I can see better at a distance. So, yeah.
Even painting while talking is also like another way, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so it's hard. I've messed all of this up, but that's fine.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Kristen, do you want to go ahead?
Do you want me to answer?
Hi. Yeah, I guess I wondered a little bit about your experience being now like a Whitney biennial artist, and how, or if it's changed your life or practice.
The thing that it has greatly affected, to be perfectly honest, so there are two things. I do think people, it's not so at the forefront of my mind. And part of that I was gonna say is that, like, when I'm having my vulnerable moments where I'm like, this is a mess, I have no idea what's happening, my husband will say, like, you stick with it, like, you were in the Whitney Biennial, you're good, go, keep going, you know, as a marker, not necessarily, you know, that's just a marker. Like, he's like, you're moving, go. So I do hear it, you know, primarily in that context, because, and rarely, I don't often freak out. But outside of that, I know that there is a cachet to it and there's a weight to it. I'm not as aware of it. What I am aware of is other artists who participated in the same biennial. I am aware, much more aware of what they're doing, and in ways that I don't think I ever would have, but because of these associations, I'm cued into it. And so there's that kind of level. And I'm not saying that I'm like paying attention to how their CV is exploding, but I just mean that I'm very aware, like, their names come up and I'm like, oh, what are they doing? And I don't think I would have done that. So it has this kind of expansion to my own engagement in a quote unquote art world. So that has changed, not for better or worse, it's just there. And my own sort of professional quote unquote life, you know, I know that it has affected it, but I think that it's more sort of a slow moving, it's much more of like what are they called? Like oil tankers at sea. It's not like a speedboat, you know, it'll just move slowly. You know what I really do get nervous about though? I mean, like, I do get nervous about, you all, like, everybody's done this. You pick up an old Whitney Biennial from, you know, catalog from 10 years ago, and you're like, never heard from that person again, or that person again, or that person again. And there's a part of me that's like, oh God, like, you know, it's good that I'm in the catalog. Hopefully you hear from me again, but also, like, it's not, anyway, that's, yeah. Does that answer that? That was rambling. Did that answer? Was that ridiculous?
Not at all. I guess that was pretty honest, huh?
Okay. So maybe? Okay. Moving on.
So we have another question from the chat from Eleanor. Do you want to ask your question yourself?
Oh, hi, Jeanette.
Hi. Oh my God, hi. How are you?
I'm good. I was hearing you talk a lot about Switzerland and where you feel like home. And I was starting to think about the paintings I first started to see from you when you were making work.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were, you know, about that early childhood and stuff in Switzerland. And I see how much you've gotten kind of away from that subject matter. And I just wonder how you see how the work has changed, the subject matter in the work.
Yeah. So when I was painting the mountains, like really painting the mountains early on, there was like, it was a very deliberate move to engage with where I had come from and landscape painting, the history of landscape painting, right? And I really wanted to take that on, because I played a lot as when I was young, being afraid to be a painter. I really was like, I came out of you know, writing and photography, and I started painting late, and so I kind of was like, I'm not a painter, and I'm not. And finally I was like, okay, I have to commit to this. So I took on these historical tropes, and so I continue to do that, right? Like self-portraiture. I'm painting landscapes again now. The female body, like, I continue to play with these like formal historical painting tropes. But as I got more comfortable with being a painter, you know, these histories that I was super fascinated by to begin with, like a lot of the German painting coming out of like no, like Utah and that whole group, Cologne. and Kippenberger and Polka. When I was always really interested in that, but it felt like you had to know painting so deeply in order to play that game, and I really felt like I didn't measure up. But then as you begin painting and working and doing your art and you function and you get more confident with things. So then I started playing with these other histories, but it was still kind of the same impulse. Like, I'm a female, I'm entering this world, so I'm going to pull at it very directly. So it's that kind of thing. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yes, no, I'm wondering. And so what you're working on now, how does that relate?
I have no idea what to paint here at all. And the canvases are like, anyway, but there's a group of Degas paintings. I forget where we saw them. Maybe it was Philly, but they look like this, like the bathers, there's these, typically it's like very elegant, like they're drying themselves, they're getting dried, then there's a whole bunch of them like getting in and out of the tub, and they look.
I know them, they're drying off. Yeah.
Oh my God, they're about to fall. It's like they're almost like asleep. It like the body looks not attractive and almost like it's old and can't move. And I thought, that I wanted to sort of capture that weird moment where you're like, I know this is supposed to be like a beautiful female body, but like something's going on here, and it was really deliberate, but it's also really confusing. So I was doing all of these like yoga moves and having Ned take photos of me, and then I was taking the photos of having him take the photos like just before I got into the move, so it looked like something was really off. And then I'm just trying to also make landscapes, and again, my head isn't in it. So it becomes something that is sort of operating on all these different levels. So I just kind of slap the figure on there, and then I am going. So
it looks great.
Thanks. I'm going to fix it after this. Talking and painting is hard.
I've never seen you painting. It's fun to see.
Oh my God. Well, then my husband has a question, so I'm gonna relate it really fast. What?
Can you talk about New Jersey?
Oh, like in what?
You've just spoken about Switzerland a lot, and New Jersey also plays a role.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, he said, can you talk about New Jersey? Because you've spoken about Switzerland a lot, and New Jersey. So New Jersey is really weird because I grew, until I was 10, I lived in the same town that Rutgers University is in. So when I applied to Rutgers, and I really only applied to Rutgers. I had no intention of getting my MFA. There was the professionalism, quote unquote, that was linked to the MFA for a very long time. It felt, I wasn't comfortable with it. I didn't like that structure. So I really didn't want to operate within it. But then you get to a point where you're like, well, I want to be able to have a job that might potentially at some point give me insurance and I can keep working. So I'm going to need an MFA. Because also in Europe, they now require it, So I was like, okay, I'm going to go get an MFA. Rutgers is, you get a fellowship, so you don't have to pay for it. And this was really important to me. And my brother lives in that town because, when he left Switzerland, he went back to this town. It's so crazy. So I moved back to the town that I had lived in when I was little. And this maybe goes to the question, to Mercedes' question about feeling where I feel like home. When I went to Rutgers, I moved back into the town that I had come from, and it felt so foreign. I recognized the streets. I knew where to drive to instinctually because I had spent so many years on those roads, but I didn't recognize any of it, and I didn't know how to fit into it, and it was really strange. I did, however, experience some very low rents when it came to studios. So I was like, I tried to convince my husband to move to New Jersey afterwards, and he was like, oh no. But now we're in the sticks, so everything changes. But yeah, Jersey is a weird place. The other thing I learned when I came back to America was that the American of Jersey is not the same American as other parts of the country, which also just, I think this is a common experience in many, many, many countries, but it blows my mind in this country, especially now. It's hyper. active in this country. It's not the same experience of quote unquote American, I think. Yeah.
I want to jump back to the performance aspect.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how your approach to performance is? I somehow understood you almost as if it's a form of pretending or playing. Is it like
No,
that?
definitely not playing. I don't see my work as play. I don't feel like I'm playing. Not play. I unfortunately I take it very seriously. It's not playtime, and when I sense play, like playtime in other people's work, it's something that I question very seriously. What I mean by performance is that inherently, this is a John Berger theory that resonated with me, and I hated it at first, and I've wrestled with it a lot. But as a female, I assume that I'm being watched, and I have from very, very young, you know. So when I get into the studio, I can't shake that, you know. And when I paint, there's so much of a male-dominated history in my mind that I still think, you know, okay, I'm a woman painting. I mean, you know, as I've gotten older, it's gotten less intense, maybe, but it's there, you know. So when I go into the space, I'm not playing, but I can't, it's very hard to shake this idea that you're not being looked at. And it's very hard to shake this idea that I'm a female painting. So that's what I mean by performative. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a double layer of being in the role, but also being the performer at the same time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your generous answers and for your performative endeavor. I really enjoyed that. I mean, I'm not sure. Are there more questions from the crowd? I think there was another one that was sent to me in private about painters and artists that you love and writers. I mean, in parts you already answered that, but is there something you can
ask it again?
About artists and writers, painters that you like yourself?
Right now I'm in a Chaim Soutine phase. Chaim Soutine is unbelievable. I'm deep in that. I'm looking at a lot of his landscapes. They're great. There's you know, it's resonating because it's super emotive, but playing with this idea of painting. And it's really intense. And you can communicate like how absolutely insane everything is through a tree, you know. They're great. It's great. Chaim Soutine is who I'm looking at. And I'm also reading, I mean, I think you've all read this. I feel like everybody at Rutgers read this, but I'm reading Caliban and the Witch, Silvia Federici. Yeah, and at the same time, I'm reading Caravaggio's biography because, you know, Federici is talking about like the heretic movement and the beginning of capitalism and how the female body works into that, and how like Foucault and other theorists sort of missed the witch hunt and the heretics in this history. And then Caravaggio is, you know, in Italy around the same time, you know, so there's this overlap that I can't focus long enough on one book to make any sense of it, but this overlap is helping me process. Yeah.
That
yeah.
makes perfect sense. Everyone. Okay, Mercedes is asking if there's a main difference between American art and European art.
I mean, the history, right? They interact, you know, but the very, very definitive differences written down in history that are sort of inarguable unless you can get a personal narrative through. you know, and I think that even would have to be like sitting down with someone and talking about it. Like what's written and put forward is still, you know, operative from, but the history is, yeah, now I think, you know, like everything in the internet age, you know, there is a uniformity, there is an experience that's shared, there is a look that is shared because we're all so accessible. So, you know, and I think obviously the way that you live, you know, especially moving forward, I mean, the way that America has dealt with this virus versus how, you know, other countries have, you know, that will really form what comes out of us moving forward, even though we all have this super global connection. You know, I really do believe that. But up until this like shift, I think there was a uniformity coming together. I think that that isn't necessarily true with a lot of, there was like a, anyway, yeah. So I think the history is a massive difference. And then there was a coming together over, you know, since, you know, we all started operating on the internet. And I don't think that's bad. I think like you're trying to talk to people, you know, it's just what it will shift greatly now, I think.
I mean, obviously it's not necessarily a formalism that makes the distinction, but it's like the whole setup.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you think like German, like a lot of my friends in Germany just now, they, as soon as they said to the government, you know, I'm an artist, they got 5,000 euros in their bank. You know, it'll make a huge difference. You know, what we see moving forward, stuff, just things like that will make a difference in what we see moving forward, you know. And I think that pertains, you know, that's the same in history. It's how these worlds operated. It really affects what you see, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I didn't get that much.
Oh my God. One of my friends got 5,000 euros immediately. I was like, are we serious? What are we doing? I want 5,000 euros now.
That would be amazing if that works out for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about money, I think that is a good moment for Christina to jump in and promote our GoFund again. Maybe.
Wow, that segue. It was good. Okay, I'm gonna make my face visible because now I feel weird after before. Okay, well, I think that was our last question, and it's 8:11. So if that feels like a good time to wrap up for you, Jeanette.
Yeah, that's great.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
So just to circle back to the beginning, again, thank you so much to Jeanette for being here. This was great and like so loose and transparent and social and fun. It's so nice to have things that are not your standard lecture. I feel like both of our online situations at the end of this weird, like very super weird semester have been really delivering on that point. So thanks. What Christina's talking about is that a self-organized GoFundMe from students for students who have lost all or most of their income. 60%, give or take, of our program is fully lost all of their income due to COVID-19, and we are trying to raise some money. We're a very public, very low income-ish kind of program with a lot of artists, all working artists, and a lot of artists who support families. So if you want to drop us a few bucks for bringing you this lovely lecture with the incredible Jeanette, or just because you like artists and we're not getting 5,000 euros, that would be great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We're just gonna hang out and wait for everyone to peace. But if you wanna say something on your way out, feel free. I don't know if you're looking at the chat, Jeanette, but there's messages for you.
Oh yeah. Thank you very much. This was a really nice, you know, moment in a sort of untenable situation. So thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. We're just so glad anyone said yes to anything. I feel like everything feels so overwhelming. When we were proposing that this was going to happen, I was like, no one's saying yes.
I was so happy to receive the invite.
You've actually been nominated several times to come to Hunter, but we have this very complex voting, like in rounds system. The list gets really large and then it gets whittled down very quickly. So there's like always these like repeat people, and then when they're finally here, I'm like, they made it, but they don't even know the journey.
Thank you.